This lecture deals with Chapter 6 on sequencing and organizing instruction. So keep in mind that when we begin to sequence and organize our instruction with our curriculum, we begin with our basic concepts. We begin with what is being taught, and this helps make learning manageable. Then we're going to relate that information to a bigger picture to make it more meaningful. And we're going to use a process of teaching, and those instructional processes can vary. So, there are some different principles for sequencing. We begin with simple steps. This doesn't mean we talk down to our students, but it structures the learning so that our students can easily understand it and they can understand the characteristics of whatever we're talking about. We typically use a lot of examples here, or analogies can be used. And then in the second step, we move to concrete examples. So at this point, teachers typically use materials or models or simulations. They can also bring in artifacts or something of that nature. So we're looking at things that are very concrete that our students can see and understand. And then we begin to add complexity to the lesson. So once we add complexity, we are going to sequence the learning so that our students can build on that prior learning they've had and understand something a little bit more advanced. And at this point, you can add functions. You can add other variables. You can begin to explain the relationships between different content ideas. And then in that final principle, we introduce abstractions. So oftentimes we do this with a question we pose to our students. And we might need to go back into previous steps. So at this point, we might need to go back and show some more models or give some more examples. But overall, the 4 steps are useful because they're a logical progression for our learning. And they're also interactive. And you can also go back and see different you can go back and redo different areas or give some different ideas to if learning is not complete. Now, when we look at the hierarchy and we're understanding the relationship between different principles, it helps to understand how these things work together. So this particular figure 6.1, gives us an understanding of that and how we can go back into that learning process and look at it again and replay certain parts or give more information. So content, that's the information that we want our students to learn. And processes are the thinking skills you want them to acquire. So those two things can go hand in hand, but they are different. Content basically equals information. Now, facts are a really fundamental part of information, and a fact is a type of content that that is singular. It doesn't always help predict other facts, and you're trying to give this information to your students, but you're also relating it to concepts and then on to generalizations. So a generalization is going to be an inferential statement. It expresses a relationship between two or more concepts. The students will have to have an understanding of content, facts, processes before they can move on to those generalizations. Two types of reasoning that we use is deductive and inductive. So deductive moves from general to specific, and inductive is specific to general. One way you can think of it is deductive is the concept first, and inductive starts with examples. When we look at different models of lesson organization, one is task analysis, and Robert Gagne is a leader in this area. He began to study the sequence in which his particular activities were planned, and he found that some elements should have come before others, and that some concepts that he left out should have been introduced at different points. And so this initial study that he did helped him to learn that he needed to rearrange some of the learning sequences and then try the lesson again. And when he did do that, he found a dramatic change in his students, and that they achieved a much different level of success through their test results. So he began to understand that this particular way of organizing was successful. And you can see the model of his organization is on page 149 in table 6.1, where it details that. So when we are doing our procedures for task analysis, we want to discover relationships between subskills, and we want to use that information to plan for effective instruction. So enabling skills are the facts, concepts, and processes that our students have to have before they can go on to really complex skills, and that leads us to whatever our objectives are for the lesson, to understand that. So we select an instructional objective that's appropriate in difficulty. We begin to identify enabling skills that help students build up to understand that objective. We divide up independent and dependent skills so that we can begin to break that down, and then we arrange an order that is appropriate, and then begin to sequence specific tasks for students. So before we do that last step, we have to first plan the sequence that we'll conduct the class. And we have to identify objectives, we have to plan appropriate activities, get our materials, plan our strategies, and then how are we going to evaluate the students, and then eventually have a plan for helping those who did not fully achieve success. In the concept analysis model, we are preparing to teach a concept, and we have to have a really good understanding of that concept. Concept analysis is a really deep examination of different aspects of a concept, and we have to understand the hierarchy. So that's the concept, the definition, the characteristics, etc. And this can be a planning tool that's very valuable because it helps us dive deeper into understanding our content so that we can fully explain it to students. And those 7 dimensions of understanding a concept, they're listed here for you. They're also explained in more depth on page 155, and give a Figure 6.4 on that page gives an example of concept analysis in the area of English language arts. An advanced organizer is taking all the elements that we want to learn and that the learner has to master, and it introduces the material and that follows, and it has to be broad enough to encompass all of that information. So we typically have that starts with a broad idea and then moves through how we'll teach that. The deductive mode of inquiry is typically used here, and it requires a body of knowledge that works through a hierarchy. Now, keep in mind that as we work through different types of instruction, different modes of learning, we have to keep in mind that learning styles are different. We have Gardner's multiple intelligences. We have different techniques we can employ as educators. And so what we need to do is understand our students, plan our instruction effectively, and keep in mind that we want to have diversity of how our students learn.